The Japanese destroyer's searchlight swept the water like a finger of death. Missing our bow by mere feet, we held our breath, engines cut to idle, drifting in the darkness off Vella Lavella. 23 American sailors pressed against PT 164's deck, trying to become invisible. In the cargo holds of the three Japanese transports behind the destroyer, nearly 8,000 enemy soldiers sat unaware that their voyage to reinforce Kolombangara was about to end in the black waters of the Solomon Sea. The date was July 19, 1943, and in exactly 4 minutes we would unleash hell from the shadows. My hands gripped the twin .50 caliber mount so tightly my knuckles ached. Beside me, Ensign Robert Dutch Vanderberg whispered coordinates to our skipper, Lieutenant Commander Arthur M.M.C. Fersenson. The green phosphorescent glow of our compass was the only light we dared show. Behind us, hidden in the moon's shadow cast by Vella Lavella's volcanic peaks, PT 168 and PT 171 waited for our signal. We were America's secret weapons, and the Imperial Japanese Navy was about to discover why darkness was no longer their ally. My name is Chief Petty Officer Thomas Tom Harrigan, United States Naval Reserve, and I was one of the first to prove small wooden boats could sink steel ships. People often ask what it was like being part of the Navy's most closely guarded secret in 1943. The truth: we were too busy trying not to die to think about making history. We only knew that if we failed tonight, those 8,000 Japanese soldiers would reach Kolombangara and slaughter the American boys trying to take that strategic airfield. Every torpedo we carried represented hundreds of American lives that might be saved. Every enemy transport we sent to the bottom meant parents back home who wouldn't receive that dreaded telegram. To understand how three boats smaller than most private yachts could challenge the Imperial Japanese Navy at the height of its power, you need to know what we were up against in the summer of 1943. The Japanese had turned night fighting into an art since their victory at Savo Island the previous August, where they sank 4 Allied cruisers without losing a ship. They owned the darkness in the Solomons. Their sailors trained for years in night combat, learning to fight without radar, relying on keen eyesight and practiced coordination. They called their nighttime supply runs the Tokyo Express. We called them the Rat Run. Either way, once the sun went down, they moved troops and supplies with near impunity. The American Navy had bigger ships, better radar, and more firepower, but we were losing the night war. Our admirals, schooled in fleet actions like Jutland and traditional battle line tactics, couldn't adapt fast enough to this new kind of warfare. Our cruisers and destroyers, built for open ocean fleet actions, were sitting ducks in the confined waters of the Solomons. We needed something different, something the Japanese wouldn't expect. That something was being built in secret boat yards from New Orleans to New York, and it would revolutionize naval warfare. The PT boat, patrol torpedo boat, was born from desperation and American ingenuity. At roughly 80 feet long and 20 feet wide, they were constructed from laminated mahogany plywood, not steel. 3 Packard 4M 2500 engines, modified aircraft power plants, pushed them to speeds over 45 knots, faster than any torpedo or conventional warship in those waters. We carried 4 21-inch torpedo tubes with Mark 13 torpedoes, a 20mm Oerlikon cannon, 50 caliber machine guns, and enough ammunition to raise hell for about 15 minutes of sustained combat. After that, we'd better be heading home or to the bottom. I first saw a PT boat in February 1943 at the Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron's Training Center in Melville, Rhode Island. I was a destroyer sailor fresh from convoy duty in the North Atlantic when the Navy asked for volunteers for hazardous duty with experimental vessels. The recruiter wouldn't say what the vessels were, only that the casualty rate would be high. Out of 200 volunteers, 40 were selected. I made the cut because I could navigate by the stars and had small boat experience growing up on Chesapeake Bay. The first time I stepped aboard PT 164, I thought the Navy had lost its mind. This wasn't a warship. It was a glorified speedboat with delusions of grandeur. The hull was wood in a war of steel and armor. Living quarters were so cramped that hot bunking wasn't just common, it was mandatory. There was no real armor, just some sheet metal around the bridge. One good hit from anything larger than a rifle bullet, and we'd be matchsticks floating on the ocean. But then I met Mac MC Ferguson, and everything changed. Mac was 28, ancient by PT standards, with eyes that had seen too much already. He'd been at Pearl Harbor aboard a destroyer when the Japanese attacked, fought at Midway, and volunteered for PT boats because, as he put it, "I'm tired of being a target. Time to become the hunter." Mac understood something that took the rest of us weeks to learn. PT boats weren't meant to fight like conventional warships. We were maritime guerrillas, seagoing assassins who struck from ambush and vanished before the enemy could react. Our crew was a collection of misfits and specialists who'd never have served together on a regular Navy vessel. Dutch Vanderberg, our executive officer, was a Yale mathematics professor who could calculate torpedo firing solutions in his head faster than most men could work a slide rule. Chief motor machinist mate Carlos Charlie Mendoza had built racing engines in Los Angeles before the war and could make our temperamental Packards purr or roar depending on what we needed. Radioman Second Class William Sparks Patterson came from the submarine service and could operate radios in absolute silence. Our torpedo man, Gunner's mate First Class Patrick "Paddy" O'Brien, was an artist with those mechanical fish. Each Mark 13 weighed over 2,200 pounds and cost as much as a house back home. Paddy treated them better than most treated their wives, polishing propellers, constantly adjusting, cleaning, and sweet-talking them. "These beauties," he'd say, "are the only reason the Japs will take us seriously. One shot, one kill, or we're just expensive target practice." The rest of our 12-man crew included two more gunners, an engineer, a cook who doubled as a medic, and seamen who did everything else. We were blacks and whites, city boys and farm kids, high school dropouts and college graduates, united by one simple fact. We were all volunteers who'd signed up knowing we probably wouldn't survive the war. Training at Melville was brutal and unforgiving. The Navy had learned from early PT losses that enthusiasm wasn't enough. We needed to be faster, smarter, and more vicious than anything the Japanese could throw at us. We practiced high-speed attacks until we could launch torpedoes accurately while bouncing across waves at 40 knots. We learned to navigate by sound and instinct when tropical squalls reduced visibility to zero. Most importantly, we learned to think like pirates rather than sailors. Commander James "Wild" Patterson, who ran the training program, had survived the Philippines campaign and escaped Corregidor on one of the last PT boats out. He had a simple philosophy. The Japanese expect you to fight fair. Don't. They expect you to follow naval tradition. Don't. They expect you to be afraid of the dark. Make them afraid instead. He taught that our greatest weapons weren't our torpedoes, but surprise, speed, and sheer audacity. We arrived at our forward base at Renova on June 30, 1943. Just as the invasion of New Georgia began. The base was little more than a fuel dump, camouflaged Quonset huts, and a rough dock hidden under palm fronds. The first thing we noticed was the smell, rotting vegetation, diesel, the sweet stench of tropical decay. The second was the sound of artillery from New Georgia, where Marines were dying to take Munda Airfield. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9, our unit, consisted of 12 PTs charged with interdicting Japanese reinforcements in the Central Solomons. The mission sounded simple: patrol the waters between major Japanese bases and sink anything flying the rising sun. The reality was far more complex. These waters were a maze of coral reefs, volcanic islands, and hidden enemy strongpoints. The Japanese had seaplanes for reconnaissance, coast watchers on every major island, and destroyer squadrons trained to hunt PTs. Our first patrol on July 5th was a disaster. 3 boats, including ours, tried to intercept a convoy near Vella Lavella. We were spotted by an enemy float plane before we could get into attack position. Suddenly, 4 destroyers bore down on us with searchlights blazing and guns firing. We scattered like rabbits through a gauntlet of shell splashes. PT-158 took a direct hit from a 5-inch shell and disintegrated, 12 men gone in an instant. We spent 4 hours dodging reefs and islands before finally escaping. No torpedoes fired, no enemy ships damaged, and we'd lost a boat and crew. That night, huddled at Renova, Mac gathered us. "We learned something important today. he said quietly. "We can't fight them like destroyers fight each other. We're not built for gun duels. We strike from ambush or we don't strike at all." It was a hard lesson, paid for in blood, but it shaped every mission that followed. Over the next 2 weeks, we developed new tactics by trial and error. We learned to use islands' radar shadows to mask our approach. We discovered that shutting down 2 engines and running on one reduced our noise signature dramatically. Most importantly, we learned to coordinate attacks between multiple boats using simple light signals the Japanese couldn't intercept. The intelligence network supporting us was remarkable. Australian coast watchers hiding in the hills of occupied islands radioed enemy movements. Native Solomon Islanders risked execution to paddle canoes out to meet us with information. Sometimes we got decrypts from Pearl Harbor giving exact convoy schedules, but most of the time we hunted by instinct and experience. PT boats were still classified as secret weapons in July 1943. Official Navy messages never mentioned us by name, referring only to small craft or mosquito boats. The Japanese knew something was hitting their convoys, but early reports described submarines or mines. They couldn't believe the Americans would send wooden speedboats against steel warships. That ignorance was our greatest advantage. On the night of July 18th, Coast Watcher reports indicated a major Japanese reinforcement convoy would run through Blackett Strait toward Kolombangara. This was the target we'd been waiting for. Multiple transports with minimal escort forced to pass through narrow water where their numbers wouldn't help them. Mac volunteered our boat to lead the attack with PT 168, skippered by Lieutenant Henry Hank Bramwell, and PT 171 under Lieutenant J.G. Joseph Joey Antonelli. The briefing was tense. Intelligence estimated 3 large transports escorted by 1 or 2 destroyers, carrying elements of the Japanese 13th Regiment, battle-hardened troops who'd fought in China and the Philippines. Commander William Bill Speck, our squadron leader, made it clear, "Gentlemen, this convoy cannot reach Kolombangara. I don't care if you have to ram those transports. They go to the bottom tonight." As the sun set on July 19th, painting the sky blood red over the Solomons, we made final preparations. Paddy ran through his torpedo checklist for the 5th time, setting Mark 13s for a shallow run and an optimal speed. Charlie had our engines tuned, mufflers installed to reduce noise. Dutch plotted and replotted our approach, calculating currents, wind, and the moon's position. I checked my machine guns one last time, armor-piercing and incendiary rounds only. Regular ball ammunition was useless against steel. AP rounds could penetrate bridge windows, start fires, and suppress enemy crews. Every 5th round was a tracer, drawing lines of deadly light across the night. At 20-30 hours, we slipped our moorings and headed into gathering darkness. The 3 boats moved in column, engines muffled to a low rumble. As we cleared Renova Harbor, Mac ordered a weapons test. The night erupted briefly in gunfire as machine guns and twinning cannons barked into empty sea. Then silence again, broken only by the rhythmic pulse of engines and the hiss of water on the hull. The ocean had a 2-foot chop that would make torpedo accuracy challenging, but it also masked our wakes and engine noise. Every advantage mattered when 80 feet of plywood went after 400-foot steel. By 2,300, we reached our ambush position off Vella Lavella's north coast. Mac cut engines to idle, and we drifted in the dark, hearing only water lapping and distant artillery from New Georgia. At 2,347, Sparks Patterson picked up a transmission from a coast watcher. 3 large ships, 2 escorts bearing 280, speed 18 knots, range 15 miles. The hunt was on. Mac started 2 engines at low throttle, and we moved to intercept. The math was simple. The convoy made 18 knots on a steady course. We could make 35 without creating too much weight. If positioned right, we'd intercept them as they entered the narrowest part of Blackett Strait, where maneuver space was virtually nil. At 0018 on July 20th, Dutch spotted them, dark shapes against the starfield, exactly where they should be. The Japanese held perfect formation. 2 destroyers up front, 3 transports following, another destroyer bringing up the rear. No lights, but size and spacing made them easy to track once you knew where to look. Mac's plan was simple and deadly. PT-168 would attack from port, PT-171 from starboard, while we steamed straight up the middle after the lead transport, literally threading the needle between the escorts. If it worked, we'd cause maximum confusion and get clear shots at all three transports. "All ahead slow," Mac whispered. We crept forward at 5 knots, letting the convoy come to us. At 2,000 yards we could hear their engines, the deep thrumming of massive diesels. At 1,500 yards we could make out details. The pagoda-style bridge of the lead destroyer, cargo booms on the transports, figures on deck. At 1,000 yards Mac gave the signal. 3 clicks on the radio and all 3 PTs surged forward. Engines roared from idle to full throttle in seconds. The night shattered as we raced toward the convoy at 40 knots. 3 small craft challenging steel giants. The Japanese were caught off guard. Their lookouts, trained for submarines or approaching destroyers, never expected attackers moving this fast from so close. We were inside their formation before they could react, racing between escort destroyers at point-blank range. I opened up with the Twin 50s, raking the bridge of the nearest destroyer, tracers punching through windows and ricocheting off steel. Fire 1, Fire 2. Paddy launched our first 2 Mark 13s, 600 yards. An impossibly close range where missing was unlikely. The torpedoes leapt from their tubes and splashed into the water, twin wakes of phosphorescence trailing them. A converted passenger liner carrying over 3,000 Japanese soldiers took the first torpedo. The destroyer to our starboard finally reacted, swinging a searchlight that found us instantly, blinding in its intensity. 25mm anti-aircraft guns opened up, green tracers reaching like deadly fingers. Shells splashed so close spray drenched the deck. Then our torpedoes hit. The first struck just after the bridge with a thunderous explosion that lit the night like lightning. The second slammed midship, breaking the ship's back. The 8,000-ton vessel lifted, split in half, and both sections began to sink. Through the searchlight glare and flying debris, we could see hundreds of Japanese soldiers spilling into the water, their screams audible even over our engines. PT-168 struck next. Both her Mark 13s slammed into the second transport, an ammunition and fuel ship that exploded like a volcano. The blast knocked me off my feet. A wave of superheated air washed over our boat. Flaming debris rained around us. Starting small fires on deck, we frantically stomped out. The Japanese destroyers now faced an impossible problem. We were too close for their main guns to depress low enough to hit us, and we were mixed among their own transports. Their solution: try to ram, using sheer size to run us down. The nearest destroyer turned hard toward us, its knife bow aimed at our beam. At the combined closure speed, we had maybe 10 seconds. Mac threw the wheel hard right and pushed throttles past their stops. The engine screamed, but we pivoted like a dancer, missing the destroyer's bow by less than 10 feet. As we passed, I emptied a full belt into their bridge at point blank, sparks flying where bullets struck home. PT-171 wasn't as lucky. Joey Antonelli had lined up perfect shots on the third transport, but a destroyer caught them in searchlight before they could fire. 25 stitched holes across PT-171's bow. One shell hit a torpedo, but miraculously didn't detonate. The warhead required arming by spinning in the water. Joey had to abort, streaming smoke and taking on water. We came around for another pass, but the surprise was gone. Every searchlight swept the water. Guns of every caliber fired in all directions. The sea looked like a storm of shell splashes. Worse, the Japanese had brought their 5-inch guns to bear. Those could blow us to splinters with a single hit. "Launch remaining fish and get us out of here," Max shouted. Hattie fired our last 2 Mark 13s at the remaining transport, but her captain combed the wakes and both torpedoes passed harmlessly along her sides. Then we ran, 3 engines at maximum, weaving between shell splashes as we fled into the darkness. Behind us the battle still raged. PT-168, despite taking hits, managed another torpedo into the burning second transport. Secondary explosions lit the strait as she went down. 2 of the 3 transports were gone. Nearly 6,000 Japanese soldiers sent to the bottom. The third transport and the destroyers survived but were thoroughly shaken. We regrouped 5 miles south of the engagement area, battered but afloat. PT-171 was worst off. Multiple holes at the waterline and one engine out. We came alongside to transfer wounded, while our carpenter's mates worked frantically to plug holes with mattresses and life jackets. PT-168 had lost her radio antenna and taken shrapnel through the superstructure, but remained combat capable. Our boat was lucky. Some shrapnel holes, a burned-out gun barrel, and scorch marks. But we were alive and we'd accomplished the mission. 2 transports sunk, thousands of enemy soldiers killed, Japanese reinforcement schedules disrupted. The surviving transport reversed course and headed back to Rabaul. The return to base was tense. Japanese float planes searched at first light. We hid in the shadows of small islands, camouflaged with palm fronds, engines off, barely breathing as aircraft droned overhead. It took 14 hours to cover what should have been a 3-hour trip, but we all made Renova. Debriefing was exhaustive. Intelligence officers wanted every detail. Japanese tactics, weapon effectiveness, response times. What we told them was distributed to every PT squadron in the Pacific. The lessons learned from that engagement saved American lives and sank enemy ships for the remainder of the war. But the immediate impact was more than tactical. Radio intercepts revealed Japanese chatter describing new American secret weapons, high-speed torpedo boats appearing from nowhere. For the first time, the Imperial Navy feared the dark. They could no longer move freely at night or guarantee safe passage even for heavily guarded convoys. Every shadow might hide a PT boat. Every sound might be American engines. Over the following weeks, the Japanese changed resupply strategy. Convoys grew larger but less frequent. Destroyer escorts doubled, then tripled. They used searchlight-equipped floatplanes for night reconnaissance. All these changes meant fewer supplies and reinforcements reached their garrisons. Crucial advantages for our ground forces. The psychological effect was perhaps greater than the tactical success. Soldiers waiting for reinforcements that never came lost hope. Commanders, unable to guarantee deliveries, had to cancel offensives. The myth of Japanese invincibility at night, shattered by wooden boats crewed by American teenagers and reservists, began to crumble. Our squadron's success led to rapid PT expansion. New bases sprang up throughout the Solomons and New Guinea. Improved boats with better engines, radar, and armor were rushed into production. Tactics we developed became official doctrine from Rhode Island to California. The cost was measured in friends who didn't come home. 2 weeks after our attack, PT-166 hit a mine returning from patrol, lost with all hands. PT-162 was caught by destroyers in daylight when engine failure left her dead in the water. Only 3 survivors were pulled from the sea. Joey Antonelli was killed by a sniper while refueling at a forward base. By October 1943, when I rotated back to the States for new construction training, our squadron had lost 7 boats and 73 men. But we'd sunk or damaged over 40 Japanese vessels and killed thousands of soldiers who never reached their destinations. The exchange rate was brutal but, in the long view, necessary. Every PT boat we lost was replaceable. The Japanese ships and seasoned crews were not. I returned to the Pacific in March 1944 as executive officer of PT 321 in the Philippines. The boats were better, radar, armor plate around the cockpit, more reliable torpedoes, but the essence remained. Speed, surprise, audacity. We continued to prove American innovation could overcome any advantage. The Japanese never fully adapted. They tried hunter-killer groups, radar-equipped destroyers, even suicide boats designed to ram us. They couldn't be everywhere, couldn't protect every convoy, couldn't make the night safe again. The secret weapon they discovered too late had permanently altered the balance in the Pacific. MC Fersenson survived the war, earning a Navy Cross and 2 Silver Stars. He stayed in the Navy and later commanded a destroyer squadron in Korea. We kept in touch until his death in 1987. Dutch Vanderberg returned to Yale and became a leading oceanographer. Skills honed threading destroyers at 40 knots helped him map currents and underwater mountains. Charlie Mendoza went back to building racing engines in Los Angeles. His garage became legendary among hot rodders. Patty O'Brien stayed in the Navy and became one of the service's leading torpedo experts, writing the Mark 13 maintenance manual used for decades. He never forgot those torpedoes. "Those were my fish that sank those transports," he'd say. "Two shots, two hits, 6,000 Japanese who never made it to kill Americans." The PT boat story is often overshadowed by bigger battles, Midway, Guadalcanal, Lake Gulf. But for those who served on these tiny wooden warriors, we knew we'd been part of something revolutionary. We'd proven technology and courage could overcome tradition and size. We showed that American sailors, many who'd never seen the ocean before Pearl Harbor, could outfight the best navy in the world at their own game. The secret wasn't just the boats, though they were marvels of engineering. It wasn't only the torpedoes, though when they worked they were devastating. The real secret was the American spirit of innovation, the willingness to try something completely different when conventional methods failed. While admirals initially dismissed PT boats as toys, junior officers and enlisted men proved toys with teeth could change the course of a war. Every time I read about modern naval warfare, missile boats, stealth, asymmetric tactics, I see the PT boat's legacy. Naval combat didn't have to be about battleships slugging it out at 20,000 yards. It could be about speed and stealth, about hitting where the enemy didn't expect and disappearing before they could respond. Every fast attack craft in today's fleets carries DNA from those plywood speedboats. The Japanese phrase that entered their naval vocabulary in 1943 was simply "mosquito boat terror," a fear that spread through their fleet. Post-war interviews with Japanese officers revealed PT boats caused disruption far beyond their numbers. They had to assume we were everywhere, to plan for attacks that might never come, to waste resources defending shadows. Admiral Tanaka Riso, who commanded many Tokyo Express runs, wrote that American PT boats were their worst nightmare. Submarines could be hunted with depth charges. Aircraft were visible, but these devil boats appeared from nowhere, struck like cobras, and vanished into the night. They made the Japanese afraid of their own element, the darkness they once owned. That fear and uncertainty were worth more than any number of ships sunk. PT boats evolved technically during the war. Early boats were peacetime designs pressed into combat. By 1945, they carried radar, rockets, improved torpedoes, even primitive guided weapons. But the core concept never changed. Small, fast, deadly, crewed by volunteers willing to take insane risks for their country. One story that captures the PT spirit happened in October 1944 during the Battle of Lake Gulf. A squadron of PTs, hopelessly outgunned, attacked the battleship Yamato. Their torpedoes couldn't penetrate her armor, but their attack forced evasive action and bought time for American escorts. Small boats didn't sink the giant that day, but their courage saved lives. PT bases became legends: Renova, Tulagi, Myoswondi, exotic names that meant mosquitoes, malaria, and midnight missions. Not Pearl Harbor or San Diego with officers' clubs and clean sheets. These were muddy hellholes where we lived on K rations and cigarettes, where mail took months, and entertainment was poker and rumors. Morale stayed high because we knew we mattered. The psychological toll was severe. Living constantly on edge, watching friends die in horrific ways. It marked us. Some cracked and requested transfers. Others became addicted to adrenaline, volunteering for ever riskier missions. Most endured, finding ways to cope. Humor helped. We named boats Sudden Death, Hell's Angels, Grim Reaper, painted cartoon characters on torpedoes. Donald Duck riding a torpedo was popular. We made gruesome songs. It was psychological armor to make the unbearable bearable. PT boats' impact reached beyond the Pacific. When Normandy was planned, PTs were included to guard the fleet from German E-boats. Lessons from the Solomons applied to the Mediterranean, the English Channel, and even rivers in Europe. American PT doctrine influenced navies worldwide. Looking back, I'm amazed we survived. We were mostly kids playing with deadly toys in a war that killed millions. We made mistakes that should have killed us, took risks that make me shudder in retrospect. But we accomplished something remarkable. We took an untested concept and turned it into a war-winning weapon. We proved American innovation and courage could overcome anything. The last operational PT was retired in 1959, replaced by newer, faster vessels. But for those of us who served on them in World War II, they will always be the boats that helped win the Pacific. We proved size doesn't determine victory. Courage matters more than armor. And American sailors in wooden boats could defeat anyone, anywhere, anytime. Sitting now in my study, surrounded by faded photographs and yellowed clippings, I can still hear Packard engines roaring in the night. I can still feel the Solomon spray on my face, still smell cordite and diesel. Most of all, I feel the pride of being part of something revolutionary, something that changed naval warfare forever. We were boys who became men in wooden boats, fighting a war we didn't start but were determined to finish. We attacked from darkness because that's where we were strongest, where speed and surprise gave us the edge. The Japanese learned to fear the darkness they once owned. They learned that American ingenuity could turn any disadvantage into an advantage. That is the legacy of PT boats. Not just the ships we sank or the battles we won, but proof that free people fighting for freedom can overcome tyranny. We were small, fast, and deadly. We were secret weapons, secret just long enough to turn the tide. We were the Mosquito fleet that brought down an empire, one torpedo at a time. The Japanese were stunned because PT boats represented everything the Imperial Navy hadn't expected from Americans: innovative thinking, aggressive tactics, and a willingness to risk everything on an unproven concept. By the time they grasped the threat, it was too late. The shadows they had once ruled now belonged to us. From those shadows we struck, without mercy, until the rising sun finally set on Japan's Pacific Empire.